Hello, I'm Tyson.
And I'm Cooper.
Today, we're going to be discussing why you should be interested and concerned about the privatization of military.
Now you're thinking, so what? Why do we need to learn this?
The privatization of military is where the government sells out their military to a private contractor where they have full reign over the entire thing, the whole thing they bought, and they can do whatever they want with it, which is a very dangerous choice because you have no idea what they're going to do with it because they have full power over it. And yeah, so it's one person controlling a huge chunk of military instead of an entire government controlling it. You have the right to your own opinion, but this video is only meant to educate you and maybe change your point of view on the world of privatization.
Now let's dive in and take a look.
The privatization of military has taken its toll in the past couple of years, but we are yet to see what the biggest overall impact it's going to be in the coming years.
Now let's look when the military became more privatized and less open to the country.
Now, let's go back in time and see how this has changed the world in general.
I think I went too far back. Come on, bring me back.
On that note, this is when the military would start becoming more privatized.
Really? Because if I'm being honest, I'm not really down to go back there. So
In 1945, for Americans, nationalism in the military was strong for the entire country.
it would never be the same after World War II, as people would not want to fight in the war after hearing stories from friends and relatives.
Yes, that is right.
I'm just good like that.
Cut the cameras.
And now, let's take a short break for an interview.
All right. We are interviewing Mr. Ryan Lay. Ryan, how much do you know about the privatization of military?
To be honest, I don't know anything about it.
Okay, well, privatization of military is pretty much, I'm going to use the U.S. government as an example. If the U.S. government were to sell off their assets in the military to private contractors so they had full authority to do whatever they wanted with the military, they could bomb anybody, they could attack anybody, they could stay peaceful, they could do whatever they want.
Wow, thank you for telling me. I didn't know that before.
Right, Ryan? To you, does this seem like a good idea or a bad idea?
No, because then contractors can abuse the power.
Ryan, if you were in the shoes of a contractor and you just paid for an entire military, what would you do?
I would go to war with everybody, and
Okay, Ryan, that's enough of that. And here's back to Cooper.
Now, in the 1960s, there was a dramatic shift in nationalism. We went from 16-year-olds and 15-year-olds in the 40s trying to join to go to World War II to 20-year-olds and plus in the 60s who did not want to go and just would go into hiding and burn their draft cards.
When the Vietnam War ended in 1973, the soldiers of the U.S. were not really welcomed back in open arms like they were in World War II. After World War II ended, many people were just like seen as saints and heroes, and yeah, they saved us. But after Vietnam War, with everybody being anti-war, they weren't treated the same. They were given labels such as like murderers and baby killers, which is like, yeah.
There's tons of issues with this, and it was the final blow to the end of open military nationalism. When the veterans came back from Vietnam and any of their proxy wars, the people who had burned their draft cards and hid from going did not welcome them back and did not make the veterans feel comfortable at home.
The soldiers who left to protect our country were practically spat in their faces when they got back because of all the riots and anti-war protests. These are real images from the protests during the Vietnam War. It shows how all the people of the U.S. were really trying to stop the war because it was just going crazy and out of hand. They were even saying stuff about their own president.
Aside from Vietnam and Korea, In the 1950s, we were still really strong in nationalism and wanted to support our country and military. Every U.S. citizen in World War II can contribute by buying war bonds. But after World War II, the end of war bonds also came. Not saying that was the fall of nationalism, but it could have been a blow.
Ending the draft in the 1970s seemed like a good idea because of how the Vietnam War affected our society and tore our people apart.
And what that war did to our country is still reminiscent today and will never probably close the gap in our country. As the government were drafting kids, they were taking poorer families and communities and taking those kids, while upper class and middle class kids were not being drafted. Even though they did not agree with this, it still would happen.
We just kept throwing our young and innocent kids into war, and they should not have been there fighting.
In the 1960s,
90s.
Ronald Reagan said that the big era government is over, which led the military from being able to draft kids to it being voluntary. Now, we've covered a lot of history of the military and what it has happened in the past, but we need to get to the impact of it right now in the future.
Privatization of the military.
Right now, the U.S. is still voluntary for joining the military, but in other countries, you're required to take at least 2 years in the service. So I'm not saying this is what needs to be done, but with privatization, with our topic of privatization, the U.S. gave control over the entire space program over to a private company. They could also do this with the U.S. military too. It just depends on what the government sees and how they're feeling about it all.
The U.S. military is already giving contractors control of our military with robotics, cameras, and weapons. But there's also other militaries the U.S. has that have given to contractors fully, which create more havoc than not. One of the big examples is Blackwater, who was a military with the U.S. that helped in Afghanistan, has switched sides and now sold itself to China.
When it comes to the future of privatization of military, we've come to multiple conclusions. Theory is where the government sells off their assets in the military to private contractors so they can do whatever they want with it. But that could potentially be a very, very big problem with people taking advantage of the system.
Some good and some bad. Now, what we just said about Blackwater is a prime example of how a contractor could just switch sides in the middle of the war and join the enemy of that certain country and then just create havoc all over that. Now, our first example is a dystopian-like future where countries have given their military to contractors who keep switching sides and is being underneath the table, having two countries in control and fighting a war against themselves, while also starting wars that are unnecessary and harmful to the entire world.
Another future is pretty peaceful, somewhat utopian-like, where either A, the government just disbands the whole military, like we just completely get rid of it, or B, contractors get the military and they slowly take it apart. There are really only two outcomes that are imaginable at this time, kind of like robots in the future, you know? Can't really see in the future, so we don't know what it's going to be like, but we have to make our best guess and our best estimate to what it could be like so we can prevent anything from bad happening.
What we're trying to get across is how this movement can be very dangerous and have good outcomes. But one thing we can leave you with and how this is affecting us right now.
If every military were to become privatized, then we would not know how contractors would be with no supervision over anything. They could just start wars randomly against people because they don't like them, which, as we've seen with how the world's been going on lately, that would not be good. We'd be viewed as terrorists, most likely, and with the arsenal the U.S. has, it could cause a nuclear apocalypse.
There was an experiment in the 1970s, the Stanford prison experiment, that you may have heard in English class. But it was where guards and prisoners were randomly assigned roles, and the guards actually abused the power.
There's no reason why a private contractor would not do the exact same thing and just take advantage of it, take advantage of their opportunity, because that's just humans in general. We all do that. We take advantage to what we can so we can improve our own lives. People say they won't be doing that. Odds are 90% of people are doing that. There's the few people that are selfless and actually will do what they can to help others, but you don't come across that very often. It's not common, so you always have to be watching your back and checking out what's going on.
Now, you might think we're all good inside, but how do we let one person take control of a military that could randomly just turn bad, because we could all be good apples that turn bad at one point? We should keep it to the government to control the military because there's more than one person in control of it. The majority vote over one decision by one private contractor who might want to bring bad and evil to the world.
Now, I hope our video and what we've told you has shed some light on this real problem that's been going on across the world and how it will be affecting us soon. But thank you for watching, and always, 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 always remember,
Do your own research.
and if you don't, I'll come after you.